Unlike some churches who say that if you accept Jesus Christ as your Savior, that's it. You don't have to worry about anything else. In the Orthodox faith, we know that it's a journey. So every day you are working towards that theosis, towards that union with God. We have to engage lay people in the mission of the church. Otherwise, it's going to get worse, the situation. When you say people were, you say we had all these monasteries and people were more religious and so on, because that was life. You woke up with the bell of the church and you walked literally, you left your house and you walked, 100 meters to go to your church. What we were thinking is, in a similar way, how could we today create a community of like-minded people or provide the space and the environment where married people, lay people, not necessarily religious people, could live together. In Armenian history, we've had women monastics, we had deaconesses, but the deaconesses were ordained in the monastery. And normally it was the abbess. Not all of the nuns were deacon.
Hello friends, and welcome back to another episode of Dust and Glory, a podcast about lived orthodoxy in the modern world. I'm Sona, a storyteller, a mom of three, and an Armenian Apostolic Orthodox Christian. My guest today is someone whose life bridges faith, intellect, and identity in the most unique way. Dr. Hratch Tchilingirian is a scholar, sociologist, a cultural historian whose work has profoundly shaped how we understand the Armenian Orthodoxy and the diaspora life today. With advanced degree in sociology, theology, and having served as dean of an Armenian theological seminary, he now teaches and lectures internationally on religion, identity, and the role of the church in public life. Before he became a scholar, Hratch once wanted to become a priest in the Armenian Apostolic Church. His heart has set on serving the altar. Yet, as he says, God has other plans. Instead of vestments, God gave him a pen and a platform, calling him to serve through research, teaching, and public dialogue. In this conversation, we'll talk about what it means to live as diaspora Christians, how the church can remain both spiritual and cultural home, the role of women in our church history that very few people know about, and what true unity might look like for the Orthodox Christians today. Before we start, friends, I would like to remind you that this video is a collaboration between the Western Diocese of the Armenian Apostolic Church and myself. We would really appreciate it if you subscribe to my channel, Ola Sona, the channel of the Western Diocese, Armenian Church WD, and please check out Dr. Tchilingirian's website, hratch.info. You will find all the links in the description to this video. And now let's welcome our wonderful guest, Hratch. I'm so glad to meet you.
Thank you for the invitation and opportunity to have this conversation together.
Thank you so much for coming. My first question is about your childhood. Please tell us about your family. I know you grew up in Lebanon. What were the non-negotiables in your family that assured that you will grow up in faith?
I grew up in a relatively big family. We were 5 siblings and my parents. So there were 7 of us. So it was very lively. My mother was very active in the community and very lively person, very enthusiastic, and she really encouraged us individually in our own lives. And my father, he was a very hardworking person, on the quiet side, but always supporting us. But also in terms of my spiritual upbringing, my grandmother, my mother's mother, was a very pious woman. At the time when I was born, she was already in her 70s. And I remember when I was 4 or 5 years old, she used to take me to the church with her she and I will go. She went to church every Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
So she would take me to the church, and I will sit next to her. Didn't understand, obviously, the liturgy, but I was fascinated as a child to look at the icons and the candles, the incense and the singing. So from that early age, I think my memory registered and took in all this. And then during the Civil War, which started in 1975, I was 13, 14 years old. Because schools closed and there was this war going on, we saw horrible things, which, as a child or a teenager, you never forget the killings and all that. So I went to Jerusalem. My parents sent me to Jerusalem, to the Armenian seminary to continue my schooling. But I already had my connection with the church, with the faith. So it was something that I welcomed, and I was excited about it. So I was supposed to go there for 1 year until, schools open back, and the people were hoping that the war is going to end pretty soon. But of course, it lasted for 30 years and more. So I ended up continuing my high school in Jerusalem, finished. And then I came to the United States to continue my university education. So my spiritual formation took place, between my grandmother's, silent way of leading me there, my years in Jerusalem. And I would say that generally my intellectual formation was within the Armenian Church, as I started reading and wanted to know more and more about not only the church aspect, but deeper into the faith and an understanding of basically Christianity is about life. It's not the history, it's not the particular writings, but if you take it, the whole thing together, it's ultimately about life.
There is a period in your life when you wanted to become a priest, before you were 32 years old.
Yes.
And you were a dean of the beautiful St. Nerses Shnorali Seminary in New York. Can you tell us a little bit more about that part of your life? And did you feel like you were called to serve?
I would say, obviously, having gone through the seminary in Jerusalem, when I came to the United States, I continued at St. Nerses as a student first. That's when I studied theology. I went to St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary in New York, as well as St. Nerses. So I continued because I was heading towards ordained priesthood. Then after I graduated seminary in New York, I came to California, to Los Angeles, and I worked as an assistant to a priest in a parish in San Fernando Valley, with the understanding that I would be married and ordained to take over the retiring pastor. So after 4 years, I was appointed the dean of the seminary at the age of 29, not yet 30.
That's impressive.
Now, when I look back, I think that it was quite early. Maybe if it were now, I would have thought twice, because some of the students were few years older than me. So I went to St. Nerses as a dean, and then, because it's an academic school institution, I had always thought about continuing towards my doctorate. And especially while at St. Nerses, because you're dealing with academic circles, we had affiliation with St. Vladimir's and so on. I thought that it is a must that the dean has to have further education and doctorates so that you are equal, as it were, on equal footing with your peers and so on. So I had calling, and I don't think I ever lost that calling. I still feel that I'm called to serve the church, to serve my community, but in a different way. But I think I've always had this, in inverted commas, pastoral identity in me, which I never left.
How do you express it in today's life?
By serving. I think in Christianity, in the Christian faith, to be a Christian is to serve God. And how do you serve God? Is through people, through His people. Mm-hmm. I think service is a crucial element, that it's not just words, it's not confessing only your faith, but what are you doing with that faith? How are you interacting and working within a community? And community, I think I always emphasize this. Unlike some other religions, in Christianity, community is the most important dimension of being a Christian. The ecclesia, because it is a communal faith. You cannot say, I'm a Christian and just live on your own in your house. You have to be associated. You have to be part of a community of worshipers, the ecclesia, because that's how you grow in your faith. It's a living aspect of life. Unlike some churches who say that if you accept Jesus Christ as your Savior, that's it. You don't have to worry about anything else. But in the Orthodox faith, we know that it's a journey, a lifelong journey towards the eternal life. So this is the temporal life, the temporary life, that you have to walk this pilgrimage, as we read in the patristic literature, that this is the pilgrimage of faith. So every day you are working towards that theosis, towards that union with God. Not just, once in a while and, by just reading something or saying that this is what faith is all about. You have to live it, not just read it or remember it. You have to live it.
And invite others to live it with you, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. You went to so many amazing schools, and you were at Oxford, you were at London School of Economics, sorry. You went to, you had the position in Cambridge, right? And then you went back to studying Armenians and Armenian culture and philology, right? And then sociology, and then doing diaspora studies. How do you make sure that through those studies and through those years in very secular worlds of those universities, you continue serving as a Christian to your community and also evangelizing and bringing others to Christ?
Yeah. I think it's very important that we individually, first of all, we understand ourselves before we can explain it to someone else. So there is that, I always emphasize that it's intellectual, it's spiritual, and it's also physical. Being a Christian, it's all these three things together.
I love that. Yeah.
Spiritual, physical, and intellectual. Because they complement and they make you a whole person in this journey. And if one lacks, then the other aspects suffer. So even the physical, physical health, not only that, but also the liturgy is a physical participation. We kneel and we cross ourselves, we bow. So it's like this full experience. So to me, on the intellectual level, it has always been important to understand in myself. And what is the basic question that any human being asks is, what is the meaning of my life? I think sooner or later, anyone, whether you're Christian or you belong to any other religion, or even if you're an atheist, most likely that you're going to ask this question. What is the meaning of all this? Why am I born? Why am I here? So to me, it's always been the discovery of this basic question. And what is the answer to this? So some people find it through faith. Some people find it through philosophy. Some people find it through, I don't know, just having a great life, party, and others through wealth. They accumulate wealth, nice cars, mansions. And so each person is trying to find the answer to this question. Mm-hmm. But you will never find the ultimate answer in this life, but you have to continuously find out. And faith, the Christian faith, Christ's message and his gospel, gives you that direction to find the meaning of your life, ultimately, which is unto death. And this is where our faith is critical, because it gives you the tools, the necessary preparation, the strength, the inner energy for you to deal with these basic questions.
It's interesting. Someone said that in the United States, when people ask you who you are, the answer is usually I'm a teacher, or I'm a scholar, or I'm a driver, I'm a clinician. When you ask the same question in Armenia, people say, first thing they say, Hi Kristonia, I'm Armenian Christian. So here, like, what's your take on that? Do you think that here we tend to think of people in terms of what they do versus who they are in their core, right? Versus in Armenia, or maybe in the Middle East as well, maybe you can speak about that. People are more looking inwardly and trying to understand who they are before what they do. What is your take on that?
In London, when I'm in the taxi, sometimes they ask me, "Oh, where are you from?" Because I have an accent. So I said I was born in Lebanon. So they could say, "Oh, are you Muslim?" I say, "No, I'm a Christian." So they assume that from a certain country you belong to a certain religion and language. So we have like these mental profiles of people. And this is another pitfall that a lot of people do, because if you have an accent, if you're darker and so on, so immediately they make a judgment as to who you are without even questioning, without even getting to know you. So these are constructs by societies and the environment you're in. In some countries, it's a matter of religion. In Lebanon, for instance, the whole country, the polity of the country is divided based on 18 religious communities, Muslim, Christian, and within each religion. So when you ask, what are you in Lebanon? They say, I'm Maronite, I'm Sunni, I'm Shia. They identify by their religious affiliation. But when they travel to Europe and they ask, what are you? They say, I'm Lebanese. So that makes a difference as to... The other thing is, at least based on our research, for instance, in the diaspora, we did a survey of 13,000 Armenians in 10 countries. Christianity is viewed mostly as part of culture. It's part of Armenian culture for over 80% of them. But when you ask them about their views on faith and church and religion, it changes. For instance, about 6 in 10 say that it's not important for you to belong to any religion or faith to be Armenian. This is based on... So 82% say Christianity is important for Armenian identity, but then they say it's not... religion or faith is not as important. So you see that there is a variety as to what you mean by Christian. Probably if you ask an Armenian atheist, he or she might say, yeah, Christianity is important because it's part of Armenian history. For 1700 years, Armenian church history is intertwined with Armenian national history and so on. So it all depends in the end on the perception of the people, how they understand. But a lot of times we assume that we understand the same thing when we are using this terminology. To me, I like to talk about Christianity not in categories, but Christianity is about life. So when you talk about Christianity, you're talking about life.
It's personal, yeah. It's more personal than
because
anything.
Everything that you need to go on with your life contains there. It's in the message. It's in the faith. We shouldn't lose the basics. It's about you finding meaning through your faith. If you're not able to do that, then the rest is just, going through the motions.
Hratch, you've been living in the United States and then in Great Britain as an Armenian and then as a immigrant and then as a Christian. What does your faith journey teach you about bridging all these identities?
Generally, when I meet people, I try to engage with them on things that are common to us rather than the differences. You have to find something, especially if you're meeting people for the first time. There are many commonalities, I'm sure, that you can find. So to start there, rather than this kind of the preaching aspect, immediately, patronizing people, which might be kind of off-putting. If you live your faith, which makes you happy and gives you a sense of dimension, you automatically are going to talk about it, right? People are going to say, "Oh, you look happy. Why are you happy? You're
What's
so
wrong
excited."
With you?
No, it's going to be infectious. Your enthusiasm and you talk about things, the good things that are happening to you, rather than just the negatives. And that's how it is. You buy a cup and you like it, you love it, and you start talking about it. You say, "Oh, Sona, this is fantastic. The color is beautiful. I use it every day when I'm having my coffee." So you start advertising it without being paid by the company. So this is what I mean. When you live your life, especially in the faith, and it's enriching your daily experience, then you have no choice but to talk about it, because it's radiating in your interactions, radiating on your face when people see you. And we recognize that, right? I mean, when we're angry, people say, "Why are you angry? You look..." From our looks, they know. And I always say that I said earlier that it's this, who you are and what you are. Others are like mirrors. They validate who we are. I could sit on my own and say that I'm this and I'm that. But unless others acknowledge that through my interaction, I wouldn't know that. So that's why this sense of community, a sense of engaging with others, starting with the family and then the larger, because then through that mirror, through that community, you get to understand who you are better as a person, as a man, as a woman, as a father, as a Christian. That's why it's important, the interaction and the sense of community. And you cannot be Christian sitting, in your living room all the time.
You've studied the influence of Armenian Orthodoxy on the diaspora. According to diaspora studies, what was the influence of the Armenian Church and how strong were the ties with the diaspora before genocide, after genocide, and nowadays? What can you tell us?
The Church has been always, as I said, part of the Armenian experience throughout history. It had protected or took care of the communities or the Armenians when Armenia wasn't independent. We didn't have a state at different times. So the Church has always been there as the guardian of the nation. And I always liken it when I speak to communities that when we say the Armenian Church, most people think of the building, right? You imagine the building or Echmiadzin or your own community. But I say the Armenian Church is the mother of the nation. The Armenian Church is a mother. That's how she's come throughout this 1700 years, as the mother. That's why we call it the Mother Church. Yeah. And it's this caring and loving mother that has gone through so much, but kept that motherly care throughout, no matter the wars, the genocides. She's found the energy and the resolve to start again every time throughout the centuries, to come out of the ashes and start again. So the Armenians collectively have always, after wars and destructions and genocides, the first thing they've done is to rebuild the church. Because that's rebuilding the community, the faith community. And that's the mother. So the Armenian Church as the mother is all of us, men and women, those who come together to worship. We represent that mother that takes care of the nation, which in effect is taking care of our own communities. So I think this is very important. And you could say this to other, for the Syriac Orthodox, it's the same. For the Greeks, most ancient churches have functioned as this mother. So I think we shouldn't think of the church as the building, as this organization that people, just come and light candles. But it's more than that.
It's a living organism.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And she becomes living through us if we go and worship together on Sundays or other times. Then she's become alive. Otherwise, it's just a building. And there are, in distant countries, there are old churches. Like if you go to India or Indonesia, there are Armenian churches, but no Armenians. It's just a building that has been built in the 18th century or whatever. So it's not the building. So we have to talk about the church as the mother of our nations, as the mother of our communities. Not only the Armenians, but particularly the Armenians. And then we understand better. And I'm not saying this myself. If you go back to the 5th century, there is the Vartanants battle in 451, when Saint Vartan and his companions were confronted by the Persian Shah to convert to Zoroastrianism. What did they say? They said, no way. The gospel is our father. The church is our mother. So these are our parents. The gospel and the church are the parents of the Armenian nation. And then this also, we see this in the liturgical life of the church. For instance, on Palm Sunday, during the Trampatek, the opening of the door ceremony, there is a beautiful prayer that says that it is through this pure mother that we go through salvation, meaning the church. It uses the word mother. So this is very important that we emphasize this aspect of the church, that it's a living thing. It's not, stone and physical entity. But that physical building is also sanctified through the consecration and so on. So it becomes a sacred space. So obviously there is a church hierarchy. You have the Vatican, you have the patriarchates, you have the Holy Archimandrite, so on and so forth. So that's also the church hierarchy. And most of the time when we say, what is the church doing? In our perception, we're talking about the centers, the official centers of the church. So that's one thing. But I want to underline the fact that if we are where we are now, we are also responsible for that.
Absolutely. We are the part of the church, of course.
So if we expect that the church should do this, should do that, and then I say, who in the church? For instance, about recruiting future priests. Where are they going to come from? Yesterday I was saying to someone in our discussion, I haven't met any parents yet who have said, we're encouraging our son to become a priest.
Oh, don't tell my husband, but I'm one of those parents.
Okay, so very good. So we need more of people like yourself, because in 20 years' time, if we're not doing something now, it might be worse. So on the one hand, you're right in the sense that what has the church done in the diaspora? There are a lot of questions, like for any other churches. And then the other aspect, that if we are to resolve some of the gaps or some of the issues that we have to be engaged collectively and not expect an organization that's out there somewhere to do these things. But the church, why the church is important? Because it provides the moral guidance. It's this anchor. Because you and I and others, we're here today, we're not here tomorrow. But the church, the mother, is always here to take care of her children. So we need to make sure that that mother is healthy. She might be old, she might have some ailments, but she's been around and will be around for a long time. Yeah. So it's just we need to put it in perspective. Otherwise, we're not going to get any resolution. We're going to blame the church and the clergy for not doing enough. The clergy are going to say, oh, there's not enough involvement or interest from the... And it's true. But on the other side of the coin is that we have to talk about secularization. I mean, globally, in the last 50 years, at least, the world has become more and more secular. And this has an influence on everyone, not only Armenians, but all the Orthodox churches, the Catholic Church, and you name it. So we cannot just ignore what's going on in the world and the perceptions. Even here in America, about 30% say that they don't belong to any religion. The nones, N-O-N-E-S. So it's about 1/3 of the population. So this is an issue, and we cannot, from my perspective, we cannot just say ignore the rest because, they're not interested in faith or Christianity. But it's a challenge for the church, the ecclesia, to bring them in closer, to accept them and work with them, educate them or show them the way, rather than just shut the door and say, we don't need you, or if you don't want to come, don't come. So this is, to me, the most important challenge for the Armenian Church and generally the Christian Church. We have to show relevance, that what the Church is teaching, like I said, it's about life. It's not about Christianity. It's a terminology. The gospel, the message, is about life today. We have to show that this is relevant to your life today. It's relevant. Second, that it's meaningful for you today. And third, it has an impact in your life and you on others. So this is the basic, to me, approach when we talk about the Christian faith, the church, Orthodoxy, and all that. Starting with the first aspect, how relevant is to a person who doesn't believe, or a person who doesn't come to church. If we show that relevancy, then that's the first step.
I was just thinking, there's so many people who also feel disconnected because of the language barrier. Their Armenian language in our liturgy plays a tremendous role. And they come and this might be a way to connect through the language, but it might be also a way to push people away, right? Because many Armenians in the diaspora don't speak the language, don't speak Armenian, and even more so Grapar, classical Armenian. So where do you go with this, and how do you explain to people that this should not become, like, where does the language matters and where does it transcends? And there's something more important comes to play. How do you explain this to people who are feeling like they're just not, they don't feel like this is their mother?
Yeah. I'm asked this question a lot of times when I visit communities. A couple of points. We have to accept that language is a barrier for a lot of people, because we keep saying to people, you have to come to church on Sundays or come to worship. And then when they come, we say, we're going to pray in a language you don't understand. So it's kind of counterproductive. However, there are cases that I know that in the past, doing the service in English doesn't mean the church is going to be packed. There has been some experiments in some communities where they did the liturgy, the Armenian liturgy, all in English, the Saint Basil liturgy, all in English. The first Sunday it was packed, the second Sunday it was full, third Sunday started to decline, and then eventually went back like normal. You had your normal number of people coming to church. So it was something new and exciting, but it didn't resolve. So I would say language is not so much the problem, but again, the intention and the interest. If you are interested in your faith, to grow in your faith, you find the ways to learn. We have the books. It's not the same as you hear, in English, but there are ways of, the Badarak is the same. You could within, 1 month, if you read it in English 10 times, let's say, you would know the meaning. Again, I'm not saying that the language is not a barrier, but it's not a solution. A lot of people use the language as an excuse. They also, the other thing they say is the service is too long. Who's going to come for 2 hours, 3 hours? It's true. These days, and with the social media where attention span is 30 seconds, people have difficulty sitting there for 2 hours. But I say, a lot of people who have the intention, who want to be part of the liturgy, they found solutions, practical solutions. They come late. Mm-hmm. They don't come from the beginning. They come for the 1 hour, for the last 1 hour, or for the half hour. It's not ideal. But under the circumstances, people have found a way of dealing with that. However, having said this, between the language and the length of the liturgy, I have suggested, and some priests do it, we need to have alternative services in English or in the language, in Spanish, in Argentina or other countries where people understand. We shouldn't, I'm not saying that we should change the language of the Badarak, because it has a historical thing, and it's kind of the ultimate opera, as it were. But we could have alternative services all in English where people participate and understand and so on during a weekday or even on Sunday, before or after. Some priests do such a thing. A lot of them, during Lent, they do the services in English during the week. So it's not like there are no solutions, but it's a matter of doing them and the willingness to organize these things. So I come back to the intention and the interest. If there is enough, if 10 people in a parish go to the priest and say, we would like to have an English service, could you please do it? I bet you they're going to have it. Yeah. But if he does it, announces it, and first 10 people come and then 2 people show up, it's not going to be there. So again, to connect it with what we said earlier, that there is the church, the institution, and there is the church, us as the ecclesia. And what is it that we want? How do we want to grow in our faith? Using the treasure we have in our church.
There's so many aspects to that. Yes, on one hand, we are losing people to Protestantism and Catholicism just because of the language barrier, and maybe also the way information is, the gospel is preached is more accessible, it's more personal, so that the parishioner is the matter of all things. The parishioner is the boss in the services, right? Versus our liturgy is God-oriented. It's around God. It's not about us. It's about Him. So on one hand, we want people to know that we're not going to let go of that very important message, that the liturgy is about serving God and Him serving us in the Eucharist. At the same time, we do want to be accessible, as you said, right? We do want people to understand the liturgy, and the solution that you're coming up with, having alternative liturgies in English, I think is a great solution, because there will be people who will always attend Armenian liturgy, whether they understand it or not. They're used to it, or maybe they find, the language is divine. The language of Grapa, the classical Armenian, is just so beautiful, and they prefer it, and they go to the Armenian liturgy. But then there are the ones who would definitely prefer to understand every word and really participate with their whole being. But what would you say are the most important things that today the Armenian Church could do to just bring the people who are astray right now, who are not a part of the church, bring them to the church?
We need more people do the evangelical work of the church, evangelical with a small e, Hratch Tchilingirian, because that's part of the mission of the church, to preach the gospel. But we don't have enough people doing that. As simple as that. If we had, 200 priests in this diocese, you would have a different diocese. You have different, but we have limited people. That's why I constantly emphasize the lay ministries. We have to engage lay people in the mission of the church. Otherwise, it's going to get worse, the situation. You're going to have a building, maybe without a priest, in 20 years' time. People are going to come, light candle, and go, because there is no badarak. You don't have a priest. I'm not talking about Los Angeles, but in faraway places. At least in the medium solution is to engage and bring in, recruit lay people to work in the church, especially women. At the moment, most ancient churches tend to push women, from doing the ministry in the church, even though they do more ministry in the real sense, starting from the family, than what the church does. Teaching the children to pray and upbringing them in the faith, and so on and so forth. So, if that's how it's going to be continued with the status quo, as a sociologist, the trajectory I see is that in 5 to 10 years, it's going to be worse, the situation. So we have to think from now, how can we bring in lay people into the life of the church, not only as volunteers, but full-time. Now we're talking about lack of enough priests, right? They're full-time. How many lay people are engaged today in the Armenian Church in full-time lay ministry?
Very few.
Very few. Very few. Why aren't we doing anything? What's stopping us?
Haik Madoyan, he was recently a guest here. We were also talking about this subject, the importance of having laymen and lay women, lay people at church ministering. Now, he also said something that really resonated with me. He said that after the genocide in Artsakh, a lot of young men and women found refuge in church, because in the times of crisis, you were also talking about it, in the times of crisis, church becomes that abode, that strengthening place, that place that brings people together and gives them a meaning, new hope and meaning. What are our actionable steps? What can we do to assure that those people, they find the church, they don't pass by?
I've studied the Karabakh society back in mid-1990s. I wrote my PhD dissertation on that, and I did a lot of research there about the religious revival, in inverted comma. So generally, when you read the research and the literature, whenever there is a crisis, societal, or there are wars and upheavals, there is a heightened spiritual revival, or people find comfort in faith or in religious practices and so on. I think this is across the board, for not only for Armenians, but generally. But it's it's not necessarily sustainable. It's like a blip. People come to attend church and they pray and they're more involved with their religious life. But then once things are calm and life is going normal, that resurgence is not necessarily preserved or kept. So obviously we're in the same situation because of what happened, the ethnic cleansing in Artsakh. You have 120,000 Armenian Artsaksis in Hayastan, so there is that resurgence. The war and everything. So it, in sociology or anthropology, it's called anomie. When society goes through these uncertainties, where it feels that they're going to lose what keeps them together as a society, the moral and the culture and all that, then there is heightened interest in faith and religion. So I think we are seeing that. Also, not only the Armenian, especially in America, it's not just the Armenians, but according to some research, there is a resurgence of especially young men going back to even Catholic churches.
Traditional religions, Eastern Orthodoxy as well,
But recently I read actually another research that says actually it's more women are coming to religion than men. That the man is not a movement, this resurgence is not a movement, but it's kind of a noticeable phenomenon. It would be, this is what the research is saying, that you could call it a movement if you say 5 million people, you have like masses of people coming back into the church, rather than this kind of tens here and few hundred there. So it's reflection of the times and the societal processes that we're going through. So similarly with Armenians, obviously with the war, 2020 war and ethnic cleansing, all that has shaken society on the moral and the meaning, that anomie, the anomic situation where you don't know what to make out of this, that we're losing everything, and you kind of find refuge in the faith.
What was the role of Armenian Church in the Middle East before the genocide and then after the genocide? Nowadays, what is the situation there?
No, Christianity in the Middle East has been there for 2,000 years. So it's later on that in the 7th century when Islam comes and spreads pretty much in the same geographic region where Christianity spread before, starting from Palestine 2,000 years ago. So the Christians in the Middle East are the indigenous people. They're not migrants or they're not diasporas as such. That's where Christianity started. It's the cradle of Christianity and Christian civilization. Even though, ironically, nowadays Christianity is viewed as a Western religion, even in the Middle East, vis-a-vis Islamic countries, they view Christianity as this European or Western religion. But let's not get into it. It's another subject matter. So in the Middle East, Christianity has always been, these are native communities that have been there, but they have learned to live under Islam. For Armenians were under Islam for 600 years. First, about 200 years under the Arab rule, and then 400 years of Ottoman Empire. So there were these monasteries and churches were there. But in the Middle East, vis-a-vis the polity, the Islamic countries, in Islam, Christians are viewed as the dhimmi, as the people of the book. Christians and the Jews were considered as the people of the book, and they were tolerated, or they were given opportunities or rights in return for special taxes and so on, protection, to practice their religion, to have their houses of worship and so on and so forth. So when you are, and fast forward to 20th to our times, so Christian communities in the Middle East and largely in Arab countries, Muslim countries, Iran, Turkey, Jordan, Syria, and so on, Christians are viewed as a religious minority within the Islamic polity, within the legal system. So in a way, the state and society imposes on you these limitations, your boundaries as a community. So as such, it kind of imposes on you to live your life within your given religious community, in this case, your Christian community. So you had your churches, you had religious education, teaching, you had your schools and community organizations. That's why, for instance, in the Middle East, Armenians have kept the language. They're fluent in the language because the system allows or enhances that. You have to go to your own, there is no assimilation as such. While in the West, when everything is open, there are no boundaries, assimilation, integration is much faster. So this is where I'm now giving you like a sociological explanation of the difference between Middle Eastern Christianity and Western Christianity in the West, including the diasporas of Middle Eastern Christianity. For instance, you have now Syriac Orthodox, much larger communities in Western Europe or Scandinavian countries than in Iraq or in the Middle East. Because of the wars and conflicts, the communities have gone to safer places. So in that sense, for centuries under Islam, they have found a way of practicing their religion, their institutions, keeping their institutions, and so on. However, having said that, we have to also think of another aspect, and which is until, let's say, the 19th century, religion decided everything in society. It's only in, late 18th, early 19th century that through secularism, through modernism and rationalism and all that, it starts to change, where the role of religion starts to decline. But until then, when you say people were, you say we had all these monasteries and people were more religious and so on, because that was life. You woke up with the bell of the church and you walked literally, you left your house and you walked, 100 meters to go to your church. Every village, every neighborhood, they had their local church. And your whole life cycle evolved around the church. The feasts, the fasting days and all that. So you knew everyone who came to church because they were your neighbors and your cousins and your, in-laws and so on. So we're talking about a very different setting in the Middle East and until the 19th century than the situation we are in the West, where we're much more self-centered, individual-centered than community-centered.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the idea that you had with Father Vazgen, who was also a guest on the show, about creating the community of believers who are not necessarily monastics, not necessarily monks or nuns, but who live together under the same rule and who are, bringing their spirituality and their faithfulness to the table. How would that work in the modern society?
I think it's kind of this idea of fantasy, as it were, that many years ago we thought we were younger and idealistic at the time. But I think it relates to what I was saying earlier about, the Western society and this more individualistic. When you look at Christianity, the Christian faith, if you really want to live it to the fullest, you see that the society we live in provides a lot of challenges to that. Whether it's, as simple as, time and distances and so on, to ideologies and, the constant bombardment with news and events and different philosophies and ideologies. So it's not as if an ideal environment where you could live your Christian faith as it's supposed to be. So, and that's, you had why the monasteries were established from, early centuries. It was exactly that, to create a space where you 24/7, like in a very ideal way, you're living the Christian gospel. Without any distractions, without the outside world coming in and, putting pressures and whether time and whatever it is. So it's like this seclusion helped the monks to live there fully there, or as much as possible, to live the Christian life and to write, the prayers, the liturgies that we have were produced in the monasteries, not in the, in the parishes. It was all what the monasteries produce. So they played very important role in creating a space for this ideal environment for Christian living. But again, this is the ideal because the real world doesn't work there. So what we were thinking is, in a similar way, how could we today create a community of like-minded people, or provide the space and the environment where married people, lay people, not necessarily religious people, could live together based on certain Christian principles and way of life, worshiping together, raising kids together, in a little town or in a place where accommodates X number of people. But of course, that would have its own challenges and difficulties. We're talking about the ideal. So we always have, I remember Archbishop Tiran Nersoyan, who was our teacher, very well-known theologian of the Armenian Church in the 20th century. He used to say to us that ideals are like the stars in the sky. We can look at them, we can follow towards them, but we will never reach them. So we need to have the vision, but in the meantime, we shouldn't forget about making practical steps, walking the journey.
Many communities, denominations in the United States have experienced creating such communities and environments of personal and spiritual growth. What can we learn from their experience? Think about Mormons, what they did with Utah. What are the things we can learn from that?
I know that there are also Catholic communities, like Franciscan, like the lay version of the Franciscan order. So there are ways of doing it. I think it comes to finding, everything starts with first step. You have one or two people who come together and develop an idea because they see a need, and then others join. So the first step if you have the right setting, it should be the right time. That's also important. Sometimes maybe it's not the right time, or the right time was, I don't know, 50 years ago when it happened, and it continues. Maybe you cannot replicate the same thing now. But I believe with this AI taking over our lives more and more, artificial intelligence, these new tools that are being created, the social media, where people are becoming more and more, as I said, self-centered universe, I think this communal understanding, the desire to be part of a community, is going to become more in demand. Because this is going to lead people to look for authenticity, something more authentic, something more meaningful than being sucked into this virtual world where you're pretty much creating anything you want, whenever you want, and believe it. Believe in what you created as if it's the real thing. So I think I see that eventually faith aspect is going to be important, because what AI can't do, AI doesn't have a soul. That's what makes us human, this God-given soul in us. So down the road, people are going to search for that authentic meaning. And I liken it, when you travel these days as a tourist or you go to other countries, you start looking for a souvenir that has a local taste to it, not the T-shirts and the mugs that every country is getting. Whether you go to London or New York, it's the same T-shirt manufactured in the same factory except the name. But you want something that's uniquely part of that city, part of that village, because nowhere else you could find that. And I think this is where we're heading as a society. We are going to look for that authentic, that unique aspect that makes us human.
I agree with you. I think that's the future. And I think the community that you were talking about is so interesting to study, because, the communities that are already created in that model, right? I think we can learn a lot from them. And I think that's where the future gets very interesting, because, you just said AI has no soul, and it's just a common sense, right? However, seeing how many people are creating these, unrealistic images of, and even relationships with the AI, seeing how they relate to the AI better than with actual humans. And so that's something surreal, something that we never expected happening, right? So that's important still to say that this is not real relationship. This is fake. This is an illusion. And I think once people actually realize that, and it's going to be very soon, I believe, because it's the way AI is progressing is just the speed is incredible. And it's admirable, right? So on one hand, we have created that,
it has its positive, and it's very useful for a lot of things, including for the church.
Ministry,
for ministry, definitely. Yeah. But one has to be very careful. But also, I always remind myself, especially if you are talking to whatever, Siri or Alexa or the AI, whether it's Croc or any of them, after a few minutes, you forget that you're talking to algorithms and you're talking to a machine, because it's so real, in inverted commas, that you forget that it's not human, but you start engaging with this machine or with the bot, whatever you want to call it, on an emotional level. And people start asking questions. I've seen, especially young people, they ask, personal question or emotional question.
They're asking dating advice. Can you imagine from AI?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, how far we've gone.
Yeah, but it's because it's so human-like that people forget. So we have to also remind ourselves that you're not easily you get into this habit of treating AI as if they're like experts and these geniuses that are made by humans.
Superhumans.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a dangerous territory. Definitely very unknown and dangerous for many people. And if you think you're not going to be trapped by that. And that's why, again, I think that, after COVID, there was this surge of popularity of traditional religions because people were isolated and they found out that they are actually... they're not supposed to be islands, right?
Yeah.
They're supposed to be community, living in community and functioning in communities and serving the communities. Yeah. And I think AI is pushing us also to think that way, that these are not real relationships and these are not real, this is not even the real knowledge that it gives you. It's just manufactured knowledge, manufactured to serve you and your interest and your selfish, interpretations and ideas. Now, with that said, I think it's important to acknowledge that technologies could be used in our ministry at church as well, in a very, very productive way. I've
always valued the role of technology, and personally I follow for many years and today as well. I read almost on a daily basis about the developments in the AI. I get a newsletter in my mailbox that they talk about what's happening in terms of the industry and so on. So it's very important that we keep pace with the technological developments and the tools that are being made available. Why? Because I think technology saves you time. Many times it saves you time, effort, and makes things more efficient. So in that sense, we could use AI and these technologies and social media and whatnot to create more quality work, more quality materials that speaks to the person today, rather than continuing with the analog world that we were in, which takes much longer, and maybe artistically the graphics are not as good as what we have now. So to use these tools for a good purpose, in this case, to preach the gospel and continue the mission of the church by addressing people in ways and in platforms that they are part of, that they're already using. For instance, no one is using flyers anymore. People used to photocopy a flyer and hand it out. Now people have apps, or it's an email, not even email, the email. So there are different ways of reaching out to people than the traditional methodologies. I mean, even the Bible now, it's in your hand, in your phone. You get daily messages and so on. Nobody's using the book, even though it's much more fulfilling to touch it. So in that sense, technology is very important tool to use. But as you said, we have to be careful that we're not turning it into something that will have a negative impact.
Absolutely. Another aspect of your research is the role of women at church. And I want to briefly speak about it because I think very few people know about the importance of women in Armenian Church. In early church, in the Middle Ages, and up to the recent times, there were grand monasteries. There were female monasteries with a lot of nuns, and they were serving the community. They were serving even as deacons sometimes at the altar. So could you speak a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, I'm going to start with the word role. This is used a lot, and recently I've been thinking about this. We say the role of the women, but we don't say the role of men in the church. So we're automatically separating the women from the men in the ecclesia. So I've been thinking about, is there any other way we can ask this question without saying the role of women? Because then when you say the role, you're assuming that you have to define what this role is, right?
Yeah.
So you are allowed to do this, this, this. So my approach is, I think we should talk about women in the church, men in the church, not the role. Because the women are already in the church in so many ways.
Yeah.
Then the family is a church, and she's there, the mother, the wife, and in terms of the faith. So this is number one, that we have to change the framing of this question in our discourse in the Orthodox Church. That's number one. Number two, I'm going to talk about the history from the present. If today we are leaving women out of the mission of the church, that means, at least in Armenia, we're leaving out 53.5% of the population out. Because in Armenia, the female population is 53.5%. In America, it's, I think, 50-50. So you're leaving half of the ecclesia, of the church, out. So you want them only to be spectators, or just to come and sit to the Badarak, sing in the choir, and teach Sunday school. Nothing else. Thank you very much. So here is the problem. Why we're not including women in the ministry of the church? Now, historically, we've had women convents or monasteries, but also we've had deaconesses, ordained deaconesses in the Armenian church tradition. Now, historically, obviously, the role of women, in the biblical times, when St. Paul in the first century was preaching, the social context was very different than 2,000 years later now. Women were perceived and were kind of boxed in a certain role in society. And I've thought about it for a lot of good reasons, because, families were large. They had 5, 7, 10, 12 children. And the women was responsible to feed this army of the family. The work that entailed to maintain the family and take care of it was, a full-time job. So they had their role restricted in that realm. And the men were, working and so on and so forth. So there is a sort of a setup or a societal way of living that impacted on the role of the women as opposed to men. So in Armenian history, we've had women monastics. We had deaconesses, but the deaconesses were ordained in the monastery. And normally it was the abbess. Not all of the nuns were deacon. It was the abbess who became a deacon, an archdeacon. And in some monasteries, like in Tiflis, they even wore the pectoral cross. They had, a ring, and they had the priestly staff as a symbol of her role and authority within the monastery. So, number one, not all nuns were deacons. It was, particular role. And then they were restricted to, to help women originally, adult women baptisms, to help them to get ready for the baptism. They helped with orphans and social services and that kind of educating children and so on. So they had their purpose for their particular convent. But fast forward to the 20th century, we had the last deaconess that we had in the convent was Deaconess Hratch Tchilingirian in Constantinople or Istanbul, who was the last nun of the Kalfayan sisters, the sisterhood which was created or established in the mid-1800s by this woman called Kalfayan, Sister Kalfayan. And they took basically took care of orphaned girls and educated them. So this monastic or this sisterhood or order continued until as a to have a deacon until Hratch Tchilingirian, Deaconess Hratch Tchilingirian, who passed away in 2007. 2007. So she was the last monastic deaconess. And now the last woman monastic that has left from the Kalfayan sisterhood, just one, she's a stole bearer, Uraragir, and she serves on the altar, but she's not a deacon because presumably there are no other nuns. So she's not the abbess. So there is no need for her to become a deaconess. But what happened in the 21st century, we had 3 women ordinations, deaconesses. First in Argentina, the Armenian Diocese of Argentina in 2001, the primate there, who, by the way, just passed away 2 weeks ago, Archbishop Kisak Manukian. He ordained 2 women as deaconesses. And for the first time, without being monastics, these were lay women who were ordained with other men as deacons. So this was...
Were there women who could get married or who were married or...
No, they weren't married, but they could get married like the male deacons who are ordained. I mean, what I call they are parish deacons or secular deacons in the sense that they're not full-time and they're not the men on the altar who serve today on the altar. They're not going to be priests. They have their jobs during the week, and on Sundays they come and serve on the altar. So these women were ordained in a similar fashion.
The same way as the male deacons.
Yeah, as parish deaconesses, they were ordained as parish deaconesses. But the two deaconesses in Argentina, the first one who was ordained, she was 17 years old. So after the ordination, the bishop was reprimanded from the hierarchy.
Oh, really?
Yep. That even though he didn't break any canons, any rules, he was just continuing the tradition. They said, oh, no, this has to be a church decision and so on. In any case, without going into the details, back and forth, they agreed that he's not going to defrock these two deaconesses, but they cannot go on the altar. Mm-hmm. So one of the first ones who was ordained in Argentina, she just left and she's no longer part of the church. The other one, she serves in the Armenian community in Cordoba. There's a small Armenian community. She's very active, but she doesn't go on the altar. Mm-hmm. She sings in the choir and helps the priests. However, fast forward, in 2017, Archbishop Sebuh Sarkisyan, the primate of the Armenian Church in Tehran, he ordained a young woman by the name of Annie Christie, together with another male deacon. Mm-hmm. So he ordained Annie Christie and a male deacon together in 2017, and she serves on the altar. She does the Vera Perum, the communion and everything. She does the full functions of the deacon, and she continues to be very active. She goes to, ecumenical meetings and conferences representing the Diocese of Tehran and so on. So she's fully functioning deacon. I should mention that the Diocese of Tehran is part of the Catholic state of Cilicia in Lebanon, and not Echmiadzin. So she's a parish deacon. She's a professional. And if she wants to get married one day, if she's not already, then there is no restriction, because there is no restriction for the male deacons as well. So why should we make an exception because she's a woman? So we made exceptions already to the lay deacons, who we're saying it's okay for them to work during the week, secular work, and then just come on the Sunday or during the ritual. So the bishop in Tehran, he's just applying the same regulations or principles to the female deaconess.
And these are the principles that church lived by for centuries, right? In terms of ordination
now,
of...
Technically, we always had full-time deacons, because the diaconate is the first step towards priesthood. There was no such thing as, part-time deacon. But over the years, especially after the genocide, to accommodate, the losses and the situation that the church was in, so they ordained men to perform that function of the deacon without the requirement of being full-time deacon. In fact, according to the rules, if you want to be a married priest or a celibate, you have to decide before you are ordained as a deacon. So when you are ordained, you should be either married or not married, so that when you are ordained a priest, you become celibate or a thing. Nowadays, that rule is also not applied, because someone who's 18 years old is ordained as a deacon, and then they're going to get married and continue to perform as a deacon.
It's so interesting. So it seems like because of this enmity with modern feminism, the church is pulling back in this, seems like very biblical tradition of ordaining women, because it is in the Bible, and Apostle Paul speaks about it a lot. So, I mean, I guess my question is there a way for us to make peace with that tradition and revive it without being at odds with traditionalists? Yeah.
As I said, I mean, we have to start with what I said earlier, that we need to include and engage women in the work of the church as a starting point, before even we get to diaconate. Because if we're not doing that, then, like you said, it's becoming, is this like a feminist movement? Is this, asserting certain rights and whatever? So it's becoming more politicized rather than a vocation, a natural way of that some women are going to serve in certain ministries and others are going to serve in the liturgical life of the church. But we have to take one step back and discuss about women in the church. Again, I'm not using the word role. Women in the church today. The rules that we have, the so-called canons, so there are no canonical restrictions, there are no theological restrictions, there are no dogmatic restrictions. So what's the point of saying that, oh no, women shouldn't do all these things?
I think it looks like it's something too progressive for the church to do, but it's actually going back to the tradition, which...
Now, remind you, of course, if there were any restrictions, but those were societal norms, societal norms that people lived. But what is important is that we're not losing the fundamentals of the faith, of the teaching.
Could you speak a little bit more about the roles? I'm sorry, I'm using the roles again, but the functions of the female deaconesses at church. What could they do and what they couldn't do?
The deaconesses did exactly what other deacons did, the male deacons did. I mean, she could go on the altar, read the gospel, and bring the Eucharist to the table, to the Choran, the Veraperum. She did everything. During the Badarak, she was equal to the male. There wasn't restrictions on her liturgical functionality.
Even in the Middle East, where the laws against women, not against, but the laws restricting women's roles in the society.
You will find videos on YouTube with a sister. Later, she became Mother Sime Sargavak, deaconess Sasunyan. You'll see videos where she's doing bringing the chalice, the Veraperum, reading the gospel.
Do you think there is a future for Orthodoxy, including all Oriental Orthodox churches here, and Eastern Orthodox Church as well? Is there a future for Orthodoxy in the Middle East? How do you see in the current political climate?
This is a very difficult and painful issue, because already, if we look in the last 50 years or so, Christianity has been reduced to very small communities spread throughout the Middle East. Starting with the Lebanese civil war 50 years ago, the Iraq war, Syria and ISIS later on, and all that. So Christians have escaped or left the Middle East to safer places. So in that sense, it has been enormously reduced in numbers. From what I've studied and read and been in the region, my sense is that there will always be Christian communities in the Middle East, but very small in numbers. Those who left are not going to go back en masse, by the millions.
That's very sad, because we have lands and monasteries and churches there that are going to be abandoned eventually.
Yeah.
All right, so there's no future of Christianity.
There is future. It's not like completely negative or,
what about
we
the
will still have
conversion?
churches and monasteries and patriarchates, but not as vibrant presence as we once had, because of the, like I said, the conflicts and the circumstances and the wars and the killings and all that.
Martyrdom is something that I spoke on this channel with Father Lazarus Yassa from Coptic Orthodox Church. Because of the martyrdom of the few, there are more people coming back and realizing that, and more converts, right, in the regions. We're seeing more converts. So because of those little communities that are not afraid to give their life for Christ, they're drawing more people eventually to become Christians and bring more converts. So what's your take on that?
I think especially with the Coptic Church, where we had the new martyrs when ISIS was around, which sort of shocked the world. So you had this barbaric group coming out. It's not even Islam. I mean, in the name of Islam or in the name of religion, they were criminals, basically. But they were using Islam for whatever purposes they had. So there you had, they were martyred for their faith because they didn't want to convert. They kept their Christian faith. And this was really, had a big impact in the region and throughout the world. So, however, this is hopefully a one-off event or situation, and not something that's going to be a regular thing, in the sense that we don't want to see Christians being martyred, on a daily basis. You see, so hopefully this is the exception or is a fluke in the thing. But it's important for the faith aspect, for the Coptic Church, that they had these martyrs in the 21st century happening in our own time. We haven't seen this. It was a rare occurrence. In terms of, again, the region, I have difficulty seeing that those who left are going to come back to live back in Iraq or in Syria and other parts of the Middle East, even Turkey. In Turkey it's going down, the numbers.
Numbers of Christians.
Christians, yeah.
What about converts? Also down?
Converts, that in Islam, it's against the law to convert Muslims into Christianity. So it's done very discreetly. In Iran, there are converts. There are small communities who are very careful. In Turkey, there are local Protestant convert communities, about 4,000 to 5,000 in Turkey, but they're constantly being persecuted or, taken to courts, and there have been killings and so on and so forth. But it's not a mass movement of converts. Mostly they were converted by foreign missionaries. Interestingly, in Turkey, through missionaries from Korea, they were converted. Originally, in the 70s, it was from United States, Protestant preachers who went to Turkey and converted. But now the government is canceling or not renewing the visas for these foreign missioners in Turkey. Yeah.
And that's in a democratic country.
Yeah, in theory, theoretically.
Wow. Thank you so much. I learned a lot. I have just 2 more very tiny questions that I want to ask, and I usually ask my guests. What is your favorite gospel, and who is your favorite saint?
My favorite is John's Gospel, and especially the first part. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and so on. Every time I hear it or I read it, it takes me to a whole, this universe of meaning there to contemplate. I like that. Among the saints, I have lots of saints, but Narigati is, Gregory of Narek is one of my favorites, because there's so much in his prayers. And not only it's beautiful, but you see how most likely he went through those situations that he's talking about. So you see how the saints became saints by going through these challenges and these battles in their faith to get to that point. And that's why they were able to write these prayers and write about it. It wasn't just like describing phenomena, but they went through this. And to me, this is very powerful. That's why I say, like, we're in this constant journey, that you are going to find these challenges and the sins and the temptations on your way to sainthood, which is unto death, not in this life.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Hratch. I learned a lot, and I'm sure the viewers also learned a lot. And thank you for sharing all your knowledge and wisdom with us.
Thank you.
I hope you'll be back again.
Sure, with pleasure. It's been a very pleasant conversation. Thank you.
Friends, if today's episode inspired you, don't forget to check out Dr. Hratch Tchilingirian's website. The links are in the description down below. And if you're new here, I would really appreciate it if you subscribe to my channel, Ola Sona, as well as the channel of the Western Diocese, Armenian Church WD. You can find previous episodes and more resources on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for listening, for sharing, and for being part of this growing community of faith. Every story brings us closer to each other and to Christ. Until next time, bye.